This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on dedicated freight corridors. The participants are Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, economic analyst, and Arjun J. Chaudhary, journalist.
Shubhamoy, do tell us something about the Bhopur-Kurja section of the dedicated freight corridor project, which has finished. It's a 351 kilometers long section of the Eastern DFC, the Eastern Dedicated Freight Corridor, which has now decongested the main line between Kanpur and Delhi, which is the line for passenger and freight traffic. So now you have a dedicated line for freight in this particular corridor. What is your take, not only in terms of transportation and logistics of goods and material from point to point, but also for industry, especially in the Uttar Pradesh area?
The freight corridor concept in India had come up because the train lines in India have got clogged in terms of the passenger movement. These lines need to have a clear pathway, and for freight to move, one of the first things that you need is a timeline in which the freight will move. So, for instance, UP is a huge market, but from there to Delhi, there is not only movement of freight, but there's also movement of passengers. It's one of the densest passenger traffic corridors in India. And it was proving extremely difficult for industry to be able to get the right of way at a proper time, to be able to ensure that their goods could move. In fact, one can't overstate to the degree that that certainty was needed for industry to be able to move goods between the two ends of this corridor. In fact, the dedicated freight corridor, as you would know, will extend not only from between Delhi and Kanpur, but will go all the way up to the Bengal zone, where passing through some of the most dense populated as well as industrial high potential regions. And that is the significance of this dedicated freight corridor.
So put it in context, when we talk about the Eastern Dedicated Freight Corridor or the Eastern DFC, it is 1,856 kilometers long, and as you just mentioned right now, Shubhamoy, it starts from the east, that is Dhankuni in West Bengal, then it moves into Jharkhand, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and then finally into Sahanewal, which is near the city of Ludhiana, Punjab, before it obviously crosses Haryana. So this eastern line is very important for industry and trade itself. This 351 kilometer section that we are specifically talking about in terms of inauguration by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In terms of the beneficiaries of this particular section of the Eastern DFC, which is the Bhopur-Kurja line, we're talking about the aluminium industry, we're talking about dairy, we're talking about textile production, glassware, locks, and pottery products in just this 351 kilometer stretch, which is starting from the eastern part to the western part. So when we look at the beneficiaries, that's pretty clear cut. How do you see employment once again relocating into this particular line itself where the Eastern DFC runs?
As you just pointed out, it's not just the existing industries. I mean, the existing industries are there, but once such a major line starts coming from Dhankuni right up to Ludhiana and further, this creates the potential for major industrial logistics chain to develop. Just to put an example, Delhi North, the NCR region this year has had an exponential growth in demand for goods, e-commerce companies which have been sort of gasping to be able to reach them. And why is it so? Because our logistics chain is extremely weak. And why is the logistics chain weak? Because of the absence of such long dedicated corridors. So we needed such a major connection to come through to be able to serve the people in this region. And that is where this particular corridor's significance comes in. In fact, it runs parallel to the Western corridor, which is also running from the same catchment area right down to Bombay and beyond.
Well, yes, you did mention about the Western DFC, the Dedicated Freight Corridor. Now, that is 1,504 kilometers long, and it starts from the northwest, which is Dadri, Uttar Pradesh, moves down to Haryana, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, and then finally southwest into the Jawahar Nehru Port in Mumbai. But more importantly, since you're talking about the consumer benefit in terms of transportation and logistics, do you expect prices of goods and material and products to come down because you have a dedicated freight corridor which is functioning? Do you see the fare also coming down as a result of it because of bulk transportation of these items? Do you see the benefit reaching the consumer in terms of pricing, whether it's e-commerce or on-site brick and mortar sales?
These logistical chains that are now coming into place, that the transformational effect will be massive. You just talked about employment and you also talked about prices. Well, I can talk about so many other things that could change the entire attractiveness of this region for industry. Right now, for instance, when we talk about, let's take a common freight like coal. Coal costs so much in India, despite India having the fourth largest reserves, simply because the cost of transporting a ton of coal from the Jharkhand belt to somewhere like Ludhiana is so much higher than importing that ton of coal from abroad. So that's an absurd situation. And why does it happen? Because of the logistical nightmare that we have. Now what is happening is that these regions will be getting an advantageous line, the freight corridor, which will ensure that there is only movement of goods along those particular train lines. And so it is like necessary not just today, but as of yesterday to get such connectivities worked through.
Shubhamoy, it's cost 5,750 crore rupees, but clearly there would be a great demographic dividend and also there are international partnerships involved here. We're talking about the World Bank funding of the Bhaupur industrial sector, which is part of the Bhaupur Kurja section of the Eastern DFC. So we are looking at industrial corridors benefiting from this section of the freight movement as well. And you see that replicated also for the Western dedicated freight corridor.
This actually changes the Indian industrial belt much more substantially than any other project that is just, situated in a particular point could have done. It makes so viable so many projects. We are talking, for instance, about vegetables, for instance, that can travel in a matter of overnight between the rich regions of, say, Bengal and Bihar to huge catchment areas of Punjab and Rajasthan, which was not possible earlier simply because the movement of such freight couldn't be assured in a proper time schedule. Once it becomes operational, then that sort of a logistical booking, people would be surprised that there used to be a problem in terms of sending vegetables by tons and tons from those regions. People would be surprised to think that it was a challenge earlier.
So clearly, it will bring down food inflation, as you just mentioned, items being priced lower because there is a lower fare when goods are moving in bulk through the freight corridor. And specific to the Bhaupur Kurja line, just to make it operational, you have a operational control center which has been put up right now. And it's state-of-the-art in terms of design, interior, ergonomics, acoustics, eco-friendly building, which has a very high rating of GRIH A4. And the construction is as per the norms of the Sugamya Bharat Abhiyan. So we are talking about the construction of this facility and infrastructure, which is creating employment and demand for construction materials. While at the same time, there is also a benefit to the public at large when they receive goods and material at a lower price and the industry which is also supporting this freight corridor, that is also creating employment. So we are looking at a major demographic dividend.
The logistics is a very powerful pull factor for industry. And here we are talking of logistics across an entire 1,800-kilometer belt, which creates possibilities. So I would say this part of the story would be yet to come. This is a corridor whose potential was never in doubt. The problem was in terms of the actual happening or the constructional thing, and that is a good thing that has finally seen the light of the day, and we are now in the process of getting it done and going.
So we're looking at short haul and long haul carriage of goods on the cars or the wagons that the locomotive pulls on this dedicated freight corridor. Do tell us something about the DFC Corporation of India Limited, which is the creation of a special purpose vehicle which is run by the Ministry of Railways. Do tell us the role of the Union Minister for Railways, Piyush Goyal, as part of the overall central policy.
It was a good thing that the government had started to the construction and the execution of this project through an SPV, Dedicated Freight Corridor of India, instead of just doing it departmentally through the ministry. What happens is ministries are not exactly very flexible. It becomes difficult to do work of this nature and of this scale through a ministry project, and that's one of the reasons why this project has been so useful. What it also would do is that the monetization possibilities of DFCL would now increase enormously. For instance, now with the project there being a clear line of sight of the project, what you'll get is the interest of the investors in the papers that DFCL can float to make investors become interested in picking up additional equity in the project, which was not possible earlier.
So you're talking about corporate financing of other joint venture projects with the railways, if I'm led to understand it properly. There are also going to be indicators in terms of the payload of each wagon, which will determine the fare to be charged. So there is a investment by the government from taxpayer money. What is the return to the government, not only in terms of demographic dividend, but the actual investment in terms of cost incurred? How do you see that expenditure coming back as revenue into the government's coffers?
Every analyst who had calculated the IRR of this project had put a very, very high rate of return. And that's to be expected because this was essentially something on which railways is most suited to do. Railways has often been hamstrung by the fact that it runs a huge passenger service and it has not been able to do justice to the freight possibilities. And DFCL's this particular corridor provides an opportunity or an avenue for railways to actually get going on a stuff which is something which should be their own, which is the freight business. And that is what we shall be expecting to see in the years to come. DFCL can actually now not just use this particular corridor. In fact, they have got plans for 7 more corridors, and each of those corridors can be spun off into subsequent vehicles for monetization. And that sort of monetization happens. Indian investors always look out for opportunities, and rightly so, for safe avenues to invest in. A paper of this sort of a corporation would be an extremely beneficial and an attractive set of things for people to be able to invest in.
I'm led to understand that there would be infrastructure bonds which would be issued against the earnings of the special purpose vehicles because of the fare that they charge to move freight on this dedicated corridor.
That is exactly what will be happening, and you will get to see many more possibilities coming up from an organization like DFCL, because it just gives people the opportunity to share in the prosperity that sort of a project creates for the country, which is not possible earlier.
Shubhamoy, my specific question is the upliftment of tier 2 cities like Kanpur, because Bhopur is near it's in that Kanpur, Dehad district of UP. So how do you see these tier 2 cities or tier 3 cities picking up as a result of the development of the freight corridor?
So the first benefit of this sort of a project is on the value of land. There is a demand that comes from industry whenever these sort of a project takes off. The areas around Delhi have benefited immensely from the urbanization phenomena. The areas further down, Kurja and down onto Kanpur, have not had the benefit of this spillover. And why has it happened? Because of the fact that there has been no straight communication possibilities or industries coming up there because of the lack of evacuation possibilities. Now, with the gradual expansion of the industrial freight corridor, we can definitely expect that lots of land in those areas which were not getting sold well because of the lack of investors will start swing of getting a good value for the land that they shall be able to sell to industries. Because certainly now you'll get lots of industries coming up on that side to take advantage.
Do you see skill development also playing a very important role, because you require skilled labor to be working at these ports which are linked to industry?
Industry starts looking for skilled labor in those areas. So along the entire catchment of that train, of that line which is being created, you get all these benefits that are coming up. It's something that India has not been able to realize for ages, simply because this particular benefit, which a dedicated goods train corridor, was not getting realized because of the pressure, unceasing pressure of having to add more and more passenger trains.
Well, thank you so much, Shubhamoy, for being with us on this program.
You were listening to a discussion on dedicated freight corridors. The participants were Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, economic analyst, and Arjun J. Chaudhary, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. The program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.